Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us your sources, and we're here to extract the truly fascinating and important insights, giving you a shortcut to being well-informed without the overwhelm.
Consider like finding the signal in the noise. Yeah.
Today, we're kicking off a deep dive into something that resonates with billions across the globe, the history of soccer. We'll be exploring the document you shared, tracing the incredible journey from, well, ancient foot games right up to the modern era's dominant sport.
It's a story that spans not just geography, but millennia,
Yeah.
evolving from simple pastimes to this huge global industry with its own complex culture and such a passionate following.
And it's packed with surprises. I mean, think about it, the earliest roots of this global game stretching back to military training in ancient China.
Right. Or the barely controlled chaos of medieval football in Europe.
Exactly. Even the word we often use for it, soccer, has this quirky backstory rooted in British university slang. Prepare for some real how about that moments.
Yeah, definitely. Our goal in this deep dive is to illuminate the key milestones and the underlying cultural forces that have shaped soccer into the world's most popular sport. We want to provide not just a timeline, but the context and, the memorable details that make this history truly come alive for you.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're starting way, way back, long before packed stadiums and televised matches, with a look at ancient foot games played around the world. It seems the urge to kick a ball around is a pretty fundamental human thing.
It really is striking, isn't it, how this instinct appears independently across different cultures, different time periods. It suggests a kind of shared human enjoyment in just this basic interaction with a spherical object.
And the earliest documented version takes us to China, Han Dynasty, so over 2,000 years ago. They played a game called Cuju.
Cuju, right.
Imagine players using their feet to maneuver a leather ball, stuffed with feathers, through a hole in a silk cloth stretched between posts. Hands were strictly off limits.
So it wasn't about overpowering an opponent physically,
Yep.
as much as demonstrating skill and accuracy. Controlling the ball with your feet, it speaks to a very different emphasis in their early ball games.
Exactly. And Cuju wasn't just some casual game. Our source indicates it was used for military training, think agility, coordination drills, but also enjoyed in the royal courts for entertainment and featured in public celebrations.
If we consider this in a broader context, it suggests that these early ball games often served multiple roles within a society, didn't they? They weren't just for leisure. They could be integrated into military practices, courtly life, public rituals.
The source even mentions Emperor Wu as a supporter.
Right, and the judging of matches based on form. That suggests a level of cultural importance we might not immediately expect.
Okay, moving east to Japan, Heian period, roughly 800 to 1200 AD, we find Kemari. Now, this offers a fascinating contrast to the more competitive games we might think of.
What did you find particularly interesting about Kemari?
Well, it was a game played by nobles, often in these elaborate ceremonial robes, and the objective wasn't really to score against anyone.
Right, cooperative.
Yeah, players worked together to keep a deerskin ball in the air using their feet, knees, even shoulders, but still no hands.
The emphasis was very much on grace, etiquette, cooperation, rather than outright competition. The source even mentions players apologizing for bad kicks.
Can you imagine?
It really highlights how the values embedded in sport can vary so significantly across cultures.
From the cooperative spirit of Kemari, let's travel to ancient Greece and Rome. They had episkuros and hopastum.
Okay.
In Greece, episkuros involved two teams trying to get a ball over a marked line. Sounds a bit like an early relative of rugby or handball, maybe.
But with that key element of moving the ball primarily by foot and working together.
Exactly. And the Romans, well, being Romans, adapted it into harpastum. The source describes it as master, more physical.
You can almost picture Roman soldiers using this as a way to train, build team cohesion across their vast empire.
Which, as the source suggests, may have had an influence on early ball games in Britain. It's like these initial seeds of foot-based ball games were being scattered across the ancient world,
Right.
and the Roman influence potentially kept that tradition alive in Britain.
It makes you wonder about the direct lineage. While it's difficult to draw a completely straight line, the Roman presence in Britain undoubtedly exposed people to ball games that prioritized footwork.
Now let's cross the Atlantic to the Americas. The game of ōllamaliztli, played by the Maya and Aztec civilizations. This one takes a distinctly different, ritualistic turn.
Yeah, the description of those grand stone courts with sloping walls using a heavy rubber ball, it immediately sets it apart from the lighter, maybe less formal games we've discussed so far.
Absolutely. Players had to use their hips, elbows, or knees to propel this solid ball through a high vertical hoop, and the stakes, incredibly high. The source mentions the possibility of sacrifice for the losing team or even just the captain.
Wow, that's a far cry from apologizing for a bad kick in Kamari.
Totally different world.
It really underscores the incredibly diverse roles that sport has played in different societies, ranging from entertainment and physical training to deeply significant religious and political rituals.
But the shared element, controlling a ball without using hands, despite such vastly different rules and purposes, that's a fascinating parallel.
It really is.
Our quick tour continues with mentions of other regional variations. Indigenous Australians using animal skin balls, though the rules are largely unknown, archaeological hints of early ball games in Egypt and Ethiopia, maybe linked to religious practices or just recreation.
Right.
And a little teaser for what's coming next, the wonderfully named mob football of medieval Europe.
These glimpses into other cultures really emphasize the widespread nature of ball games throughout history, even if the finer details haven't always survived. It helps us understand that the later development of football in Europe wasn't a completely isolated thing.
So looking at these ancient games as a whole, what are the key takeaways? What do they tell us?
Well, connecting back to our central theme, it's clear that the core elements we recognize in soccer, using a ball, a preference for kicking, teamwork, the pursuit of a goal, these aren't inventions of a specific time or place.
They seem almost universal.
Exactly. They appear to be fundamental aspects of human play and social interaction. Balls served as tools for developing skills, expressing rituals, fostering social bonds, even simulating aspects of warfare.
And the focus on kicking.
Well, the tendency to favor kicking often seems to arise as a way to equalize physical advantages, make it more about skill. Sport, in its various forms, has been shaping human culture for thousands of years, long before it became the professionalized global industry we see today.
Okay, let's dive into Chapter 2, which plunges us into the gloriously chaotic world of mob football in medieval Europe. Forget carefully marked pitches. This was a very different ballgame.
Yeah, the contrast with the more structured ancient games, and certainly with modern soccer, is quite dramatic. This was a period of largely unregulated, localized ball games that often sound more like, well, organized brawls than the sport we know.
Exactly. Mob football is described as this broad term for local ball games across Europe, maybe 12th to 18th century. The basic idea was simple. Get a ball, often a pig's bladder, rather delightfully.
Chuckles.
Just some designated goal. Could be anything, a tree, a church door, even a river.
What's fascinating is the sheer scale and the lack of any real organization. Two teams, often representing entire villages or maybe different social groups like married versus unmarried men.
Right.
Would essentially engage in this massive free-for-all across the landscape. No referees, no defined playing area, and barely any agreed-upon rules.
And it wasn't just kicking. The source emphasizes carrying, shoving, outright wrestling. It was all part of it.
Sounds less like a sporting contest and more like a small-scale, localized riot, which likely explains why it was banned so often. The source highlights the inherent dangers, common reports of injuries, significant property damage, even occasional fatalities.
We're talking repeated attempts by English and Scottish monarchs to outlaw it. King Edward II in 1314 said it caused great noise in the city, a public nuisance. Later, Edward III and Richard II were worried it was distracting from archery practice, which was vital for defense.
Right. Practical concerns.
Even James I of Scotland called it foul and harmful.
But what's truly remarkable is the resilience of these games. Despite the constant threat of being outlawed, mob football persisted. It shows how deeply ingrained it was in local tradition and community identity, often tied to important religious and seasonal festivals.
Absolutely. The source notes its role in fostering social cohesion, often linked to key dates like Shrove Tuesday, Easter, harvest celebrations. It was a way for communities to come together, often with annual games passed down through generations, reinforcing that local identity.
And incredibly, some of these traditions have survived into the modern era. The Royal Shrovetide football in Ashbourne, England, the Haxey Hood game in Lincolnshire, they're prime examples.
Still going strong.
They maintain that sense of chaotic, largely unscripted play, but are now practiced more as unique cultural heritage events,
I have to picture the equipment inflated pig bladders, or maybe just bundles of rags for the ball, the pitch, the entire town.
Right.
And players just wore their everyday clothes, though I bet some learned the hard way that a bit of padding might be a good idea.
So, amidst all this apparent chaos, what fundamental elements of the modern game can we trace back to mob football?
Well, the source identifies several key contributions. The basic concept of team-based competition, obviously. The primary method of advancing the ball being with the feet. And the fundamental idea of scoring by getting the ball to a designated distant goal. All that has roots here. Plus, the sheer public enthusiasm for these local contests really underscores the enduring popular appeal of the sport.
And maybe most importantly,
The very lack of rules and the resulting mayhem ultimately created a recognized need for standardization, for, as the source calls it, civilizing the chaos.
it's a fascinating illustration of how even seemingly primitive and unruly activities can contain the seeds of much more structured and regulated forms of play. The passion and the core objectives were there, just waiting to be refined and codified.
Okay, Chapter 3 takes us from those often violent village greens to the more regulated environment of British public schools during the 18th and 19th centuries. This is where football starts its transformation from a chaotic folk tradition into a game governed by rules.
Yeah, this period is pivotal. We see a significant shift from these decentralized, community-based games to a more formalized development within the context of elite educational institutions.
Exactly. Schools like Eton, Harrow, Rugby, Westminster, they held immense prestige and placed a strong emphasis on character development through physical activity. Sport wasn't just fun. It was seen as a crucial tool for instilling values like discipline, teamwork, even moral fortitude in the young men who'd go on to lead the empire.
And football, even in its early, somewhat rough forms, became integrated into school life. However, as the source points out, these were contained environments with established authority, so the complete anarchy of mob football couldn't really persist.
Right, so each school began to develop its own distinct version of the game to better manage it within their specific context.
Which led to a rather bewildering situation where each major public school essentially had its own set of rules. Rugby school famously allowed carrying the ball.
Which led to rugby, of course.
Exactly. Eton College favored dribbling with the feet on a rectangular field, often with walls. Harrow had its own unique rules with bouncing and catching, restricted carrying. Winchester even had a complicated offside rule played on a circular area.
The lack of any standard must have created considerable confusion. Imagine students transferring between schools and having to learn a completely different way to play basically the same game.
Oh, absolutely. The source rightly highlights the fundamental disagreements on things like using hands, the shape of the ball, the offside rule, scoring methods, even the number of players.
But this period of independent experimentation was actually crucial, wasn't it? Because it forced these schools to start writing down their rules, something that hadn't really been a feature of the more informal folk games.
Precisely. The very act of codifying these local variations was a significant step towards eventual standardization. And by the mid-19th century, as former students from these different schools went on to universities and wanted to continue playing together, well, the need for a common set of rules became increasingly apparent.
And this is where the famous Cambridge rules come into play, right?
Exactly. Developed in 1848 by students representing various public schools, the Cambridge rules were a landmark attempt to create a unified code. They prohibited carrying the ball, emphasized kicking and dribbling, and introduced basic concepts of goals and offside.
Now, the source notes they weren't immediately universally adopted,
Right.
but they proved to be highly influential in the later formation of the Football Association.
What's particularly interesting is how these elite educational institutions, initially just seeking to manage a boisterous pastime, inadvertently became the testing grounds for the rules of modern football. And as these former students moved into adult life, they naturally carried their preferred versions of the game with them, leading to the emergence of the earliest football clubs in the 1850s and 60s.
Like Sheffield FC, founded 1857, the world's oldest football club.
That's the one. But again, these early clubs often operated under their own sets of rules, leading to more disagreements and challenges when clubs from different backgrounds tried to compete.
Sounds like a recipe for endless arguments on the pitch.
Which ultimately provided the necessary push for that pivotal meeting in 1863 that resulted in the formation of the Football Association, which we'll get to next. But it's important to recognize the broader impact of these public schools. They really shaped how sport was viewed and valued, seeing football as a tool for developing manly virtues and fostering national pride.
And these values, along with the game itself, were then spread across the British Empire.
Right. And the emphasis on Playing the game fairly, sportsmanship, became a fundamental aspect of sporting culture.
So in a relatively short historical period, football underwent this significant transformation, from a rather uncontrolled popular pastime to a more structured activity for gentlemen.
Exactly. Which, as we'll see, eventually paved the way for its widespread adoption by the masses. The public schools provided not just the initial rules and structure, but also a certain ethos and set of values that would prove crucial for the next stage of football's development.
Chapter 4 brings us to that crucial turning point, the establishment of the Football Association in 1863. As football's popularity exploded beyond public schools, the urgent need for a standard rule book became undeniable.
This is truly the moment the modern game starts to coalesce. The 19th century in Britain, it was a period of increasing industrialization, urbanization, and with that came a desire for order and standardization in many aspects of life, including sport.
As football's appeal broadened, the patchwork of different rule sets just wasn't practical.
Exactly. The source highlights the rapid growth in football's popularity among the working and middle classes during the 1860s. Clubs were springing up in these burgeoning industrial towns and cities. But imagine trying to organize matches when each team might have completely different ideas about the game. Could you handle the ball? What was a valid goal? It must have been incredibly frustrating.
The lack of universal rules created huge logistical and competitive challenges, especially in growing urban centers like London, Sheffield, Nottingham, where interclub matches were becoming more common. Teams playing by fundamentally different codes made fair competition almost impossible.
So on October 26, 1863, representatives from 11 different clubs met at the Freemasons' Tavern in London to try and sort this out. A truly pivotal gathering.
It really was. Key figures like Ebenezer Cobb Morley from Barnes FC, who became the FA's first secretary, played a vital role. And among the founding clubs were names like Barnes FC, Blackheath FC.
The latter playing a significant role later in formalizing rugby.
The source mentions 6 meetings, and the debates were apparently quite lively, particularly around 2 key issues: hacking, basically kicking opponents' shins.
Right, a rugby-style thing.
And whether players could carry the ball.
These were the crucial points. The ultimate decision to ban handling the ball, with a brief initial exception for fair catches, soon removed, and to outlaw hacking proved decisive.
And this led to the split?
Yeah, it led to the withdrawal of Blackheath and other clubs that favored a more rugby-like style, effectively marking the formal divergence between association football soccer and rugby football.
And on December 8, 1863, the first official rules of the Football Association were published. 13 rules that, as the source notes, were remarkably clear and established many fundamental elements we still see today.
Absolutely. Concepts like no handling, throw-ins, goal kicks, free kicks, a defined offside rule, all codified in those initial 13 points. And goals were scored when the ball passed under a tape stretched between 2 posts, no actual crossbar initially.
It's interesting what was still missing. Though things we take for granted now, like a solid crossbar, a penalty area, substitutions, even red cards.
True, but it was an enormous step forward. The adoption of these FA rules wasn't immediate or universal, mind you. Clubs like Sheffield FC, with their own established rules, resisted initially.
Till eventually.
By the 1870s, the advantages of a single unified set of rules became increasingly obvious, and most major clubs gradually adopted the FA standards.
Which then led to really significant developments. The first official interclub matches under common rules, more clubs forming, especially in industrial areas, and the emergence of a shared national sporting identity around this standardized game.
And we shouldn't forget the establishment of the FA Cup in 1871. The source points out it was the very first national knockout competition, and its growing popularity played a vital role in spreading the standardized rules and capturing the public's imagination.
Now, here's a fun fact. How did association football become soccer?
Yes. As the source explains, association football was the formal name to differentiate it from rugby football. But Oxford University students, with their love for playful abbreviations, shortened association to SOC and added the common suffix, giving us soccer.
So the term soccer, which many might associate with the U.S., actually originates from British university slang. Funny how language evolves.
What's truly remarkable about the FA's formation is its lasting legacy. It wasn't just bureaucratic rulemaking. As the source aptly puts it, it marked the birth of modern team sports as we know them.
A blueprint almost.
Exactly. The FA's approach inspired other national federations, led eventually to FIFA in 1904, and ultimately gave us the standard format for the World Cup, leagues, international rules. And that fundamental decision to ban handling is what gives soccer its unique identity, that flowing, strategic game played primarily with the feet.
Right. Chapter 5 takes us into what the source calls football's first golden age, the period right after FA codification, marked by the rapid growth of clubs, exciting competitions, and the beginnings of professionalism.
This is the era where the FA's foundations really started to bear fruit. With consistent rules, the conditions were ripe for structured competition and a burgeoning football culture across Britain.
And the football club became the fundamental building block. The source reminds us that while the FA was crucial, many early clubs actually predated it, formed by ex-students or in industrial communities. Foundational clubs like Sheffield FC, the oldest, and Notts County, the oldest professional league club, and those FA pioneers like Barnes and Blackheath.
Initially, as the source notes, these were largely amateur outfits, often linked to churches, schools, or businesses. But as the standardized game's popularity surged, the number of clubs just multiplied dramatically, reflecting that growing public enthusiasm.
Then came the FA Cup in 1871, football's first truly major competition. Still prestigious today, and the source rightly emphasizes its vital role in popularizing the sport. That knockout format, the drama, the unpredictability, it really captured the public imagination.
The early FA Cup finals often feature those amateur teams from London and the South, like Wanderers FC winning the first one in 1872. But as football's reach extended north into the industrial heartlands, a significant shift began to occur. The rise of working-class clubs.
Absolutely. By the late 1870s, 1880s, football had firmly taken root in industrial northern England. Sheffield, Manchester, Liverpool, Blackburn, Bolton. Clubs like Blackburn Rovers, Preston North End, Accrington Stanley often had strong ties to local factories and working-class communities.
And the teams reflected this shift. Players weren't just upper-class amateurs anymore. Increasingly, they were coal miners, factory workers, textile laborers, the people powering industrial Britain. And they brought a different kind of passion and intensity.
And they were successful. These northern working-class clubs started challenging the southern amateur dominance and, crucially, started winning the FA Cup. A big change. But this success also brought a simmering issue to the forefront: professionalism.
Right. The FA initially insisted on amateurism, banning payment. But the reality, especially up north where players often couldn't afford to play without compensation, was different. Many clubs found ways around the rules under the table payments. Shamateurism.
Offering fake jobs and such.
Exactly. The pressure to officially recognize and regulate professionalism mounted as matches got more competitive. The financial stakes rose, and the gap between FA ideals and reality widened. Finally, in 1885, after years of debate, the FA legalized professionalism.
A truly transformative moment.
Absolutely. It allowed open recruitment, gave working-class men a real career path in football, and undoubtedly boosted spectator numbers as the quality of play improved significantly.
And then, 1888, another pivotal development, the formation of the Football League. Largely the idea of William McGregor of Aston Villa, his proposal. A regular, organized competition for stable fixtures and reliable income.
With 12 founding clubs, including prominent names like Preston North End, who famously went undefeated in the first season, the Invincibles, Aston Villa, Blackburn, Bolton, Everton. The Football League created that consistent week-to-week competition, introduced promotion relegation, fostered long-term rivalries. It basically became the model for domestic leagues worldwide.
And with these stable competitions came the real emergence of the modern football fan. It wasn't just a pastime anymore. Supporting your local club became part of your identity, your community. Huge, passionate crowds started attending regularly.
The source paints a vivid picture. Standing terraces, team colors and kits, songs and chants echoing around the grounds, that deep local loyalty. Football clubs became powerful symbols of class, region, civic pride, integrating the sport into everyday life, especially in industrial northern England.
Chapter 6 takes us even deeper into that intricate connection between football and working-class life in industrial Britain during the 19th century. It wasn't just recreation, it was deeply woven into the social and cultural fabric.
Exactly. The source paints this powerful picture of industrial Britain soot-covered cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield, Birmingham, Newcastle. For the working class enduring harsh conditions and long hours, football offered a crucial outlet, excitement, and a profound sense of community.
And as we've touched on, many early clubs weren't started by the elite, but by the industries themselves, factory owners boosting morale, church groups providing leisure, railway companies forming teams. Clubs like Bolton Wanderers, Blackburn Rovers, Stoke City all have roots in these mill and mining towns, their identities intrinsically linked to local industries.
The source emphasizes the intense local pride tied to these matches, often seen as symbolic battles between towns or workplaces, a real us versus them feeling. Supporting your local club became a fundamental expression of local identity.
And legalizing professionalism in 1885 was huge for these communities. Talented working-class men could actually earn a living playing football. It offered social mobility and escape from grueling industrial labor and local fame.
While the source rightly notes wages weren't always huge and contracts could be restrictive, the hero-like status afforded to these players by local supporters was immense. They represented the hopes and aspirations of their communities on the pitch.
And Saturday afternoon became this ingrained ritual, perfectly aligning with the end of the half-day work shift. Crowds, often still in work clothes but with scarves and colors, would flood into the stadiums. Purpose-built grounds with large standing terraces became landmarks in these towns.
The source beautifully captures the active nature of these early fans. No passive observers, they lived the game. Stadiums reverberated with chants and songs, often adapted from music hall tunes or hymns. Pubs and streets near the grounds became vital social hubs, cementing the club's central role. A win could lift an entire town. A loss could cast a shadow.
And it wasn't just escapism. The source makes a really insightful point about football reflecting deeper social struggles. Debates over wages, tickets, governance often mirrored broader class tensions. Players sometimes organized, like early unions, demanding better treatment. In mining areas with labor unrest, matches could take on political undertones. Teams like Sunderland, West Ham, Nottingham Forest had historical links to workers' movements.
Ultimately, as the source concludes, football in industrial England became much more than just a game. It became a powerful working-class expression of agency, a sphere where ordinary people felt ownership, collective pride, and even symbolic victory in a society often marked by significant inequality.
Okay, by the late 19th century, football was firmly established in Britain. Chapter 7 tells the story of how this British game then began its journey to becoming truly global, largely propelled by the reach of the British Empire.
This is a fascinating example of cultural diffusion on a massive scale. Alongside governance, language, education models, football became another significant export of the expansive British Empire.
And the reasons were multifaceted, weren't they? The source points out the game's relative simplicity, its perceived ability to reinforce values like discipline and teamwork valued by colonial administrators, and maybe even an underlying sense of promoting British cultural superiority. British schools, churches, army garrisons, naval bases worldwide became key points of introduction.
The role of individuals like sailors, soldiers, engineers was also pivotal. British merchant ships were like floating football factories, with sailors playing impromptu matches ashore and introducing the game to locals in port cities globally.
Right.
Similarly, British soldiers stationed abroad often played for fitness and morale, sparking local interest. And British engineers on infrastructure projects frequently formed clubs within local communities.
Latin America, particularly Argentina and Uruguay, provides a really compelling example. British immigrants in the late 1800s played a huge role introducing football. British-run schools, like the Buenos Aires English High School, established some of the earliest clubs.
But as the source highlights, by the early 20th century, the game had truly taken root and evolved into a passionate pursuit of the local populations. Argentinians and Uruguayans formed their own iconic clubs like Boca Juniors and Peñarol. In Latin America, football wasn't just adopted, it was actively embraced and infused with the region's own distinct cultural flair and passion.
And in India, the story takes an interesting turn, evolving into a game with significant symbolic resonance against colonial rule. Introduced by British military and schools, initially dominated by British teams, football gradually became a means of expressing national identity, even resistance. That Mohun Bagan victory over a British Army team in the 1911 IFA Shield is a huge example.
It underscores how sport can often transcend mere recreation and take on deeper political and symbolic meanings, becoming a focal point for national identity and even resistance against colonial power.
The spread continued across Africa and Asia, too. Colonial officials, missionaries, soldiers introduced it. It became embedded in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and grew in Japan, China's treaty ports like Shanghai, Southeast Asia like Singapore, Malaysia. In each place, it grew from a foreign curiosity into a widely embraced mass cultural force.
And as the source concludes, this global diffusion led to countless clubs emerging in ports, cities, colonies, often initially founded by British expats or local elites. But over time, these clubs were increasingly taken over and embraced by locals, becoming powerful symbols of national and local identity.
Chapter 8 focuses specifically on Latin America's unique transformation of football, detailing its evolution from those British origins into a deeply passionate and culturally significant expression.
This is where we see a clear example of how a sport can be adopted and then completely reimagined through the lens of local traditions, values, passions. Latin America didn't just learn football. It infused it with its own distinctive soul.
As we discussed, the British introduced it in the late 19th century. Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, through expats, port cities, schools, railway companies. Early clubs in Argentina, like Alumni Athletic Club, had strong British ties.
But the crucial development was the rapid, widespread adoption by local populations, leading to its democratization beyond elite British circles. In Argentina, clubs like Boca Juniors and River Plate, with strong working-class roots in Buenos Aires, quickly became cultural institutions. Their intense Superclásico rivalry is still one of the most passionate in world football. We also saw early development of incredibly talented local players shaping a unique technical style.
And then there's Uruguay, a relatively small nation that emerged as an early global footballing power. Their remarkable Olympic golds in 1924 and 1928 were essentially world championships then, and famously they hosted and won the very first FIFA World Cup in 1930, beating rivals Argentina.
Uruguay's early success wasn't accidental. The source notes the nation invested significantly in sports infrastructure and actively promoted football as a vital source of national pride and unity. They also developed a distinctive, well-organized, often more disciplined style that sometimes contrasted with their neighbors' flair.
And speaking of flair, we have to highlight Brazil. Introduced by Charles Miller in the 1890s, initially played in elite circles, it rapidly spread to working-class Afro-Brazilian communities, beaches, favelas.
And this is where Brazilian football truly found its unique identity. It evolved into this fluid, expressive, often breathtakingly skillful style, emphasizing creativity, improvisation, or rhythmic quality reflecting the country's diverse multicultural heritage. The concept of jogo bonito, the beautiful game, really became synonymous with the Brazilian approach.
The source makes a really insightful point about the deeper significance of football in Latin America. Often a powerful symbol of working-class identity, resistance against colonial influences, a crucial platform for immigrant integration, a vital expression of national pride, especially during hardship. Governments even co-opted it for national unity and projecting strength.
And stylistically, Latin American football developed distinct characteristics, emphasis on intricate short passing, tiki-taka, individual dribbling brilliance, flair, aesthetic beauty and movement, and that very palpable emotional expressiveness on the pitch. All contributed to a unique footballing identity, often contrasting with more rigid European approaches.
Chapter 9 shifts back to Europe to explore its own football revolution, detailing how the game spread and was adapted by different nations, leading to strong domestic leagues and powerful national teams.
Yeah, while Latin America embraced a more expressive style, Europe was also undergoing rapid development, building on British foundations, but also reflecting distinct national characteristics.
In Germany, for instance, introduced in the 1870s by British expats, it quickly gained traction in urban industrial regions. The German FA, the DFD, founded in 1900. The early emphasis, the source notes, was on discipline, order, physical prowess values resonating with the national ethos.
And that early focus on structure and organization undoubtedly played a significant role in shaping German football into the formidable, successful force it became, renowned for tactical discipline, strength, and mental toughness.
Italy saw football arrive in the 1890s, mainly through port cities. The Italian FA, FIGC, formed 1898. Early on, clubs like Juventus, AC Milan, Inter Milan rose to prominence. Italian football developed a strong tactical identity, often emphasizing defensive solidity, the famous catenaccio system, and passionate regional rivalries.
And as the source points out, football in Italy also got intertwined with politics, particularly under Mussolini, who used the national team's World Cup wins in 1934 and 1938 for fascist propaganda.
In France, football arrived a bit later, late 19th century, often via English teachers' students. Le Havre AC, 1872, claims to be the oldest club. The French FA, FFF, established 1919. Ligue 1 launched 1932. French football developed a reputation for technical skill, a certain flair, maybe influenced by the diverse cultural mix, especially in Paris.
And across Europe, the early to mid-20th century saw the formation of strong domestic leagues: La Liga in Spain, the formalized Bundesliga in Germany, Serie A in Italy, Ligue 1 in France. These leagues fueled intense local rivalries, deep fan engagement, and spurred significant tactical innovations, from catenaccio to pressing and creative midfield play.
Before major pan-continental competitions like the Champions League, there were earlier European international contests, like the British Home Championship, the Central European International Cup. While maybe less known today, these early clashes allowed different national styles to develop and spark some long-standing international rivalries.
And as we've seen elsewhere, football in Europe also became deeply intertwined with national identity and politics. Dictators using it for propaganda, working-class clubs becoming symbols of local pride and resistance. Clubs like FC Barcelona became potent symbols of Catalan identity and regional aspirations. This deep emotional connection is a defining characteristic of European football.
Now, our source then transitions into a more chronological overview of the 20th and 21st centuries. Let's start with the early foundational period, 1900 to 1914.
This era really lays the groundwork for the truly global game. British influence was still significant, and early rule codification provided a foundation for wider international expansion.
One key development was soccer's first official inclusion in the Olympics: Paris 1900, St. Louis 1904. Participation was limited, but it marked the first steps towards organized international competition on a major stage.
And alongside the Olympics, club football across Europe was really taking shape. By 1900, more structured leagues existed in England, Scotland, and elsewhere. We see early growth of clubs that became giants: Man United, Arsenal, Aston Villa, and national championships emerging in Germany, Austria, Switzerland.
But perhaps the most significant event was founding FIFA in Paris in 1904. A truly pivotal moment for establishing an international governing body to oversee the growing number of international matches.
Exactly. Initial founders included France, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, with England joining in 1905. FIFA provided the essential framework for future growth, regulation, and organization of international football globally.
The next period covered is the impact of World War I and the subsequent interwar years, 1914 to 1930. Immense disruption followed by significant resurgence and growth.
As you'd imagine, World War I had a profound impact. Leagues suspended, players enlisted. But the game's unifying power meant even amidst conflict, there were informal matches, like the alleged Christmas truce game in 1914, which speaks volumes.
After the war, there was a relatively rapid recovery and a real surge in interest, especially in South America, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, developing strong domestic leagues and competitive national teams.
And during this interwar period, the Olympics remained the primary international platform. Soccer returned officially in 1920. Uruguay's stunning consecutive goals in 1924 and 1928 really established them as a dominant force and highlighted football's growing strength outside Europe.
We also saw further strengthening of domestic structures in the 1920s with league formation expansion. Italy's Serie A, Spain's La Liga both took shape in 1929, featuring clubs like Real Madrid and Barcelona, and South American leagues were increasingly professionalized.
This period of post-war recovery and structural development really sets the stage for the next major milestone, the FIFA World Cup.
Which leads directly into the next section, the birth of the FIFA World Cup, 1930 to 1938. Under Jules Rimet's vision, FIFA finally created a truly global tournament independent of the Olympics.
The inaugural World Cup was held in Uruguay in 1930, fitting given their Olympic wins and independent centenary. Only 13 teams participated, just 4 from Europe due to the long journey.
Right, the travel was a big issue.
But it was a watershed moment. Uruguay won, beating Argentina in the final.
And despite limited European participation, the 1930 World Cup was seen as a success, laying the foundation for the most prestigious tournament in football. It expanded to 16 teams for Italy 1934. Though that event was marked by political undertones, Mussolini using it for propaganda. Italy controversially won at home.
And they defended their title in France 1938, becoming the first to win consecutive World Cups.
The looming shadow of World War II then darkened the landscape. The next section covers 1939 to 1945, which understandably brought major international football to a standstill again.
The planned 1942 and 1946 World Cups were canceled. Organized football was largely disrupted. Players enlisted, stadiums damaged or repurposed. But the spirit didn't entirely disappear. Informal matches, regional leagues continued where possible. Wartime leagues emerged in places like England to maintain morale.
And it's important to remember, As the source highlights, even during WWII, football held social and political significance. Governments, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Soviet Union, recognized its power for morale and propaganda, staging symbolic victories.
Finally, the source covers post-war reconstruction and the lead-up to the 1950 World Cup, a time of rebuilding and renewed hope for international football.
With hostilities ended, FIFA reconvened, national associations restarted leagues, there was a palpable hunger for sport and international cooperation as a means of healing and rebuilding connections.
The 1948 London Olympics were significant, the first major post-war international competition, symbolizing peace. Sweden won gold, and Hungary's impressive performance hinted at their emergence as the mighty Magyars.
And FIFA began planning the first post-war World Cup, awarded to Brazil for 1950.
Yep.
Immense anticipation, Brazil built the massive Maracanã Stadium. As the source emphasizes, by 1950, football was truly expanding globally beyond Europe and South America, with growing interest in Africa, Asia, North America, laying groundwork for its future dominance.
And that brings us to the modern era. The source then transitions to the history of soccer from 1950 to today, charting its incredible transformation into the global mega-industry and cultural phenomenon we know.
The immediate post-war period saw that revival, culminating in the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, the Maracanã. But, as the source reminds us, the tournament produced one of the biggest upsets ever. The Maracanazo Uruguay beating the heavily favored home team. A profound impact on Brazilian football culture.
Meanwhile, in Europe, club football rapidly regained momentum, and early foundations for international club competitions were laid.
The decades between the 50s and 70s saw true global icons emerge and key international competitions established. Pelé burst onto the scene in '58, leading Brazil to the first of 3 titles in this era, establishing himself as a legend and showcasing Brazil's captivating style.
And at club level in Europe, 1955 marked the start of the European Cup, later the UEFA Champions League. Real Madrid's remarkable early dominance elevated their status and raised the profile of continental club football. Interestingly, while Brazil had flair, European football saw increasing tactical innovation. Italy's defensive catenaccio, Germany's discipline. England's pragmatic approach won them the '66 World Cup.
The period from the 70s through the 90s is often seen as a golden age. Influential players, tactical innovations, continued World Cup expansion. Johan Cruyff and the Dutch team captivated with total football, though narrowly missed World Cup glory twice.
And then, of course, Diego Maradona. Sheer brilliance, individual genius inspired Argentina to win in '86, including the hand of God and goal of the century. His impact extended to Napoli and Italy, too. The World Cup itself expanded from 16 to 32 teams, allowing greater global representation. We started seeing glimpses of African and Asian teams' potential.
Modernization really accelerated from the 90s into the 2010s, driven by commercialization, global superstars, and significant growth in women's soccer. The English Premier League formed in '92, fueled by huge TV deals, ushering in massive financial investment, attracting top international talent, expanding global audiences.
This era also saw the ascent of contemporary superstars like Zidane, Ronaldinho, and then the unprecedented dominance of Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, redefining individual excellence. The UEFA Champions League solidified its position as the pinnacle of club football, rivaling the World Cup in prestige. And importantly, women's soccer received long overdue recognition and investment. The FIFA Women's World Cup, professional leagues like NWSL, FA Women's Super League, showcasing incredible talent.
And that brings us to the 21st century global game today. Technological advancements like VAR and goal line technology have significantly impacted play and officiating. The financial boom continued, massive foreign investment, soaring transfer fees became commonplace.
Soccer's significance now extends far beyond the pitch, playing an increasingly prominent role in social and political discourse, anti-racism campaigns, discussions around human rights at major tournaments. And of course, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar was a landmark event, culminating in Messi finally leading Argentina to victory, cementing his legacy.
Looking ahead, the source touches on future developments. The expansion to 48 teams for the 2026 World Cup, co-hosted by USA, Canada, Mexico, signals further global reach.
We're also seeing continued growth in emerging markets, USA, China, India, Africa, suggesting further diversification. And there's increasing focus on sustainability and reform financial regulations, player welfare, youth development.
So from humble, often chaotic beginnings, soccer has truly evolved into this global cultural phenomenon, constantly adapting, growing, yet fundamentally retaining that core essence of skill, strategy, and passionate human connection.
And now, just to leave you with some truly intriguing, maybe surprising insights, here are a few selections from those 50 lesser-known facts our source unearthed. For instance, did you know the very first international match, England versus Scotland, 1872, ended 0-0?
Or that the 1950 World Cup didn't actually have a formal final match. It was a final group stage.
Right, and India famously withdrew from that same 1950 World Cup, reportedly because FIFA wouldn't let them play barefoot.
Can you believe the fastest red card ever was just 2 seconds after kickoff?
And this is a classic.
Yeah.
The original World Cup trophy, Jules Rimet, stolen before the '66 tournament, was found by a dog named Pickles.
Amazing. Also in '66, North Korea reached the quarterfinals, a huge shock.
It's incredible that goal nets weren't standard until 1891, and yellow and red cards weren't introduced until the 1970 World Cup.
How about a goal scored just 10 seconds after kickoff in a World Cup match?
Or a match ending 149-0. In Madagascar, the losing team scored own goals in protest.
That's unbelievable, and Brazil's the only country to play in every single World Cup.
Pelé was the first footballer in a video game. And remember Zaïre's bizarre free kick clearance in '74.
Oh, yeah. And the only goalie to win the Ballon d'Or was Lev Yashin in '63. And women were banned from playing organized football in England for 50 years, 1921 to 1971.
And a Brazilian goalkeeper, Rogério Ceni, scored over 130 career goals from free kicks and penalties. Truly a remarkable and often surprising history.
What an incredible journey. From those ancient kicks in the dirt to the global spectacle we know today, the story of soccer is truly a fascinating one. Hopefully, you now have a much deeper understanding of the historical forces, the key figures, and those pivotal moments that have shaped the world's most beloved sport.
And considering soccer's enduring power to ignite passion and shape cultural identities across the globe, well, how might ongoing technological advancements and the ever-evolving landscape of global communication further transform the way we experience and interact with the beautiful game in the years to come?
What new possibilities and maybe what challenges might arise as soccer continues its global trajectory? Some truly compelling questions to consider. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the rich and surprising history of soccer.